What you are watching is the start of a process, not a finished idea, not a polished argument, just the act of thinking made visible. I wanted to create a structure where, for 1 hour each day, I sped it up. This is 3 times speed, but this is me writing for an hour. I sit down and write whatever is actually present in my mind. No heavy editing, no waiting for clarity first, no requirement that the thoughts be complete. Just the practice of showing up and documenting what is there. Because sometimes the hardest part of understanding yourself is actually allowing yourself to observe what is happening without immediately trying to correct it. Now, normally, writing is hidden. We see the finished essay, the finished post, the finished idea, but we rarely see the uncertainty that came before it. We rarely see how many directions a thought can move in before it settles somewhere temporarily. Recording the process changes the relationship we have with our own thoughts. It introduces a small amount of accountability, but also a small amount of compassion. You can't pretend the thought didn't happen, but you also don't have to pretend that it defines you completely. It becomes something observable. One of the more difficult experiences a person can have is not being fully certain whether their interpretation of reality is accurate. It creates a kind of internal doubling. There is the thought, and then there is the observation that the thought may not be reliable. And when that happens repeatedly, it can begin to affect your sense of continuity. Days start to blur together. Time can feel less like a sequence of clearly separated events, and more like a continuous flow. Sometimes that can feel peaceful. Other times, however, it can feel destabilizing. Writing becomes one way of placing small markers along that flow. Little points that say, something happened here. There is one important distinction I want to make, and that is that writing about a thought is not the same as endorsing that thought as fact. The mind can generate ideas that feel extremely compelling, even when another part of the mind recognizes that those ideas may not be accurate. But both things can be true at the same time. Documenting the thought allows a small amount of distance. It creates the possibility that the thought can be examined later from a different state of mind. And sometimes that distance is enough to reduce the intensity of the experience. Memory plays a large role in how we construct identity. We often assume that who we are is continuous, but in reality, we are constantly reconstructing ourselves from fragments of memory. When memory feels incomplete or distant or inconsistent, it can feel like the narrative thread of the identity becomes thinner. And when that thread feels thin, the mind often tries to fill in gaps. Sometimes it fills those gaps with reasonable explanations. Sometimes it fills those gaps with explanations that feel unusual or unlikely or difficult to evaluate. Writing creates an external record that does not rely on memory alone. It allows the present moment to exist somewhere outside the mind. Choosing to make something like this public is a bit uncomfortable. There is always the possibility that people misunderstand or interpret things too literally, or assume that everything written represents a stable belief. But there is also something valuable in allowing others to see the process of thinking. Not just conclusions, not just outcomes, but the messy middle, where most actual cognition takes place. If nothing else, this becomes documentation of what it feels like to move through uncertainty while still attempting to create meaning. A lot of modern stories explore the relationship between mind and technology. Questions about perception, simulation, observation, consciousness. These ideas appear in philosophy, science fiction, neuroscience, psychology. They are recurring themes across disciplines, which suggests that humans have always been interested in understanding the boundary between subjective experience and external reality. Even before modern technology, people asked similar questions in religious or metaphysical terms. The language changes, but the curiosity remains. There is something stabilizing about committing to a repeated action. 1 hour every day, a simple container. Even when the content changes, the structure remains predictable, and predictability can create a sense of grounding. It reduces the number of decisions that need to be made. It removes the question of whether to begin. The decision has already been made. All that remains is to sit down and allow whatever appears to appear. Publishing something online always involves uncertainty. Sometimes things will or may not, but I hope will, connect with people. But the possibility of connection can still influence the way we think. Even imagining that someone else might encounter these words can make the process feel slightly less isolating. Even if the audience is very small or arrives slowly, the act of communicating still matters. Communication itself can be meaningful, regardless of scale. I don't know exactly what will this project become. Maybe it remains a small archive of thoughts. Maybe it evolves into something more structured. Maybe patterns emerge over time that are not visible today. But consistency often produces insight that intensity alone cannot produce. Small efforts, repeated many times, can reveal things that single large efforts cannot. To close, for now, this is simply day one, an attempt to observe the mind without immediately judging it. An attempt to create continuity across days. An attempt to understand something that is, by nature, difficult to fully understand. If nothing else, this moment now exists somewhere outside of memory. And tomorrow, the process begins again.